So yes, we do see revolution, but in our data set, it really shows up as more global.
Yes.
It may be sparked by things in the U.S., but it pretty much all comes out at about the same time.
Yeah,
the time frame is seemingly accurate, though.
All right, which makes sense, though, because, I mean, when all this stuff was going on in Wall Street and everything was collapsing and falling apart and the dollars were dropping, I mean, that was a global thing. I mean, it was happening everywhere. I mean, even other countries were talking about bailout packages for banks in their countries as well. So we saw it all across the world, in a sense. Let's
be clear about this, though. Let's not apply the language you're using. We have indeed seen this, but we are currently still seeing this. It is not a done deal. We're right in the middle of it, and it hasn't even really started to blossom yet.
True, which was going to be my next question. What are you seeing for the future as far as, is it going to stabilize eventually or no?
Yes, it will stabilize. That's a given, because the humans oscillate between chaos and order pretty much. But it won't necessarily stabilize as people understand it now. In our data sets, for a number of years, we've had a postulate that says the longer we see particular language showing up, the more impact it's going to have. And so, for instance, something that's really going to have a huge impact, we might see 6 months or a year out, like the tsunami we saw, I think, 8 months out. That sort of deal. The economic thing here we saw coming a couple of years in advance. But above and beyond the economic, we've had this meme, this thought pattern of death of dollar that's been around for probably 5 or 6 years. And the death of the dollar is going to be traumatic for the whole planet. So it will stabilize, but it won't stabilize with you using a dollar and having a grocery store to go to and spend that dollar in. You may end up with some form of script temporarily. We're going to go through just horrific times as the dollar itself dies. And the existing power structures, the real problem we have at the moment is that everything you're going to hear coming out of Washington, D.C., in spite of the fact that they're claiming change, is merely going to be at a big picture level to try and prop up the existing system, which is based on the dollar and paper debt. So they are doomed to failure because the dollar will die, as will all paper debts. So at some point in the future, according to the way in which our data lines out and the current trends that are emerging, we're going to be facing a world in which paper debt is repudiated and giant defaults of contracts back and forth. This is going to have a huge impact on the federal government. We're going to go through an 1890s style collapse of currency, in which case some areas will have local currencies spring up. Other areas will have energetic little banks that will have something that everybody thinks is collateral, and they'll form a script around it that will be traded locally. And we're going to go back to that kind of a system simply to compensate for the death of the dollar, in spite of the fact that the powers that be seem determined to introduce a new currency that will be a global currency, if you will, and be probably digidollar based, that is to say digital and not a thing. The data seems to indicate that that isn't going to work, that it's just not going to go anywhere. So we're going to have the Argentina-style collapse, where after the collapse of their currency due to IMF monkeying around with things, they ended up with a whole bunch of different scripts and different approaches. And so it stabilizes, yes, but not in support of the old existing system.
Right. Some people have sent email about this particular subject to me and said that they feel as if though all of this is kind of pre-orchestrated in order to usher in the Amero. And I know that there's even been some stock market guys on television saying people should pay attention to the Amero. The Amero is the one to keep your eye on. I mean, any input on that one?
We have all that data, but that's conscious descriptions. So we have archetypes for a new currency, but not necessarily focused on on an Amero or a regional currency per se. And on a credibility level, while the Amero may indeed be issued or ushered in, the issue really is that all paper currencies have a finite lifespan. And so it's not as though it was a planned destruction of the dollar in order to create the Amero. It was the people that created the dollar in 1913 knew exactly how long it was going to last and what they could do to prop it up. And they want to have something ready to maintain their power over others when the dollar dies. And so they will offer up a new currency. Then it's just a question of whether or not we buy it.
Right, and that's pretty much what they did with the euro, isn't it? The same thing?
Correct. Correct. What they attempted to do with the euro, you note that it's not successful, that they haven't passed the pan-global or pan-European constitution.
Yes.
They had a number of countries just basically say, no, get out of here. When taken to referendum, they're trying to force the Irish to vote twice, as though, repeating the act again will somehow come out with a different outcome. Well, of course it will, because they'll engineer it that way now that they know what the true feeling is.
Right. I got some questions here for you. It says, could you ask Clif his latest on the Israeli mistake as it was happening over there right now?
That is a long-term meme we've had going that we applied initially to an event and then said it was probably a process, and it really began with the Ossetia attacks on August 8th by Georgia, which was actually instigated with Zionist participation, and we're seeing probably the brutality language emerge now. I'm writing something about that in the current 1109 series, part 0. We're going through it because the Israeli mistake was a set of words that came around the idea that the Zionists who control Israel would attempt something militarily that was beyond the pale, so to speak, going too far for nations and peoples to accept.
Yes.
And it would be based on brutality. It would be seen that way and would create a pariah state mentality against Israel that would ultimately lead to boycotts of all things Israelis and even further problems. And it appears that they're going down that road now. A lot of people, including ourselves, have said that, well, maybe they would attack Iran. Right. I never really saw the Iran attack as being anything successful. Now, the part of the Israeli mistake, the language itself is dominated by this metadata layer, which is duality, and meaning that the thing will have two visible sides to it. So the mistake component is going to have the military mistake of them going one town too far, if you will. But also there's the mistake in the sense of not only going on out and causing the brutality, which sets up the whole scenario, but they will go and make a military mistake within the general mistake, which will lead to some high level of casualties. The high level of casualties, we're assuming at this stage, would be Israelis because of the level of language supporting the idea of absolute shock and horror on the part of the non-military Israeli population. Right. And then at that point, there's a little bit of a rethink. Yes. A little bit more revolution meme comes in.
With recently, we had Russia going to Venezuela. They were delivering, military crafts and doing exercises out there in Venezuela. Venezuela's never been a big fan of the United States. Of course, Iran is not a big fan of the United States, and Russia.
Well, okay. Now let's be real clear about that. I hate to intrude, but that's not necessarily true. Iran and Venezuela don't like the U.S. government.
Yes.
But that's not the same thing as the United States. Iran and Venezuela have no problem with me. They probably have no problem with you. But they don't like our policies in their particular regions. So as long as we're clear about that, then I would agree with that statement. But we also have to note that the Russians sent their oldest warships there. Yes. And it was a limp-in place kind of a show deal, was not really a significant military exercise.
Right. Well, a lot of people were looking at this and saying, okay, well, wait a second here. We got China, we have Russia, we have Iran, we have Venezuela. They all kind of see the same thing as far as U.S. policy and not being a big fan of it, especially with the now administration that is now leaving, finally.
Yes.
But a lot of people were really concerned about that. They started thinking, well, is the United States, free from attack from this, or are they going to band together and attack? And
well, do our policies promote enemies? Yes, they do. Do our policies, like I've seen statements come out of Israel that say, basically, poor Israel, no other nation on the planet is treated so illy and thought of so badly. And it's like, well, hang on, dudes, maybe there's a reason. And it's also true of the U.S.
Right.
I don't actually have anything in our data that suggests that we're to be attacked in that manner, no.
Right. Well, that's good, because, I got to say, for a while there, I was thinking, I just had a bad feeling. It was if there was something Something big and bad was coming around the corner for the United States. What? I have no idea. It's just a feeling that I got.
Well, it is quite true. I would agree with you. Something big and bad that will dominate for years is coming, and it's going to be oppressive to the point where the dimmest, most despairing photographs of people you ever saw out of the previous depression are going to be held up as "Happy Days Are Here Again" posters. And it's going to start globally with the dollar, because bear in mind, the repercussions of the death of the dollar are worthless paper being promoted through the planet by the idiots that run our country now and run Wall Street these past 15 or 20 years.
Right.
We have taken our debt and sold our debt. Basically, they have turned all of us into debtor slaves in selling treasury notes that are backed only by the good faith and credit of the United States. Government? I don't know. You know, they're not so faithful, and they don't have any good credit, in my opinion.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So what's China going to do, since they've taken the wealth of their nation, their savings, their national retirement, and invested it in U.S. treasuries? How are they going to feel when we repudiate, when we come on out and spend our way into hyperinflation and say, yeah, we'll redeem those